And it appears we are live. What's up, everybody? It's Mr. Drew, here to welcome you to another episode of the Andrew Glowczewski Experience. This is going to be episode 224. Going to continue these character portraits I've been working on. I was actually looking at them and I was like, oh snap, there's actually a series of drawings that I wasn't going to do that I'm now feeling a little compelled to do. So yeah, it might be fun to do those sort of things. I was just thinking about it literally before I started, before I hit the record button. It just kind of struck me. So I was like, oh, okay, so I'm gonna have some stuff to draw. But either way, we're just gonna focus on the portraits and continuing this series for now. We're about halfway done with it, so that's all good. Today's date is August 10th. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you're watching an old video. If you want to catch these things live, uh, you can watch them on Patreon. Usually they go right, or watch them on Twitch. Usually they'll go right up on Patreon uh, right afterwards. So you could catch them there, earlier if you wish. Will have to be a patron in order to watch those videos. Um, and that's only starting at $1 a month. And, that's just like kind of just general support for the arts and this artist here. And other than that, man, if you really like the style and everything that I'm doing and what you see and da 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 da, if you like all that, thank you. One and two, starting at $3 a month, you can commission me to work on and do any sort of illustration. I like to focus on characters, but I also work on props and environments. So if that's something that you'd like to see from me, and who knows, hang up on your wall, put up as a wallpaper on your phone or something. I don't know what people do with this stuff anymore, but yeah, man, starting at $3 a month, man, you could do that there. And then there's tiers that go above and beyond that, all very flexible, and yeah, man. Other than that, let's get started. Gonna start a new page here. Super exciting stuff. I've already prepped the page. Let's adjust the camera. And let's get going. I got YouTube playing in the background. And I've been watching some One Piece and Suicide Squad stuff. But what's going to be coming up is someone talking about why there'll never be another Splinter Cell. That's Max Durrott. Or Matt Durrott? I don't know. And then some Metal Gear stuff. And then if we make it this far, Tyler the Creator interview. Just because I was a big fan of his album Igor. And, I guess he had an interview recently, so whatever. I'm just wrapping up this, let's just get into the Splinter Cell video. Let's find out why this guy thinks there'll never be another Splinter Cell sequel. I used to play those games back in the day. I never played the most recent one, maybe even the most recent two, but...
It has been really damned hot where I live, and I don't have air conditioning. As a result of that, my ability to string complex metaphysical ideas together has been compromised for the time being. My brain just won't comply, but having said that, I could speak on this other subject real quick because it's something I've thought about for years, so it won't require that much cognitive effort. While I was trying to piece together the next episode in my Answer to Job series, I took a break because, obviously, as I said, my brain wasn't working at normal capacity. So I decided to browse YouTube, and I noticed this video pop up in my recommended feed. My attention was captured by these two attractive-ass men, Chris Cornell and Kurt Cobain, but more so by the title. Why aren't there big rock bands anymore? Some of you might be wondering why a video about music has any relevancy to Splinter Cell, which is why you clicked on this video in the first place. Well, it has to do with the fact that in respect to both mediums, there is so much more content available that is very easily accessible. In this video, a veteran radio broadcaster, Alan Cross, explains what has happened to the music industry in the last 30 years and why it has impacted not only rock bands, but basically any artist that doesn't fall into the pop genre. I will summarize what Alan says, but nonetheless, I recommend you guys go watch the video in full because it is very thorough and I actually happen to agree with everything that he says. After I
So he
summarize,
makes a
I'll
video
show the
about Splinter Cell.
parallels between the music
Okay.
industry and the gaming industry. As I said just a second ago, there haven't been rock bands that have been huge cultural phenomena in the last 10 to 15 years. Sure, there have been great rock bands that I'm fond of, like the Arctic Monkeys, Black Keys, Jack White, Cage the Elephant, but none of these bands are topping mainstream charts the same way that Pearl Jam or Nirvana did back in the 1990s. Alan Cross explains that this has to do with a change in business model, thanks to the advent of the internet. Back during the time of Nirvana, back before the internet was a thing, a band's success was based on a consensus among radio stations, record stores, and music video channels like MTV and Much Music. If all of these sources agreed that a band was special, then you were encouraged to go down to the record store and spend $20 on an album. The money you spent on that album wedded you to the band in a way. It invested you in that band's aesthetic, their style, their unique sound, and generally their success. However, there was the advent of the internet, which brought about Napster, which allowed people to share music for free. Then after that, there were the streaming services like Spotify. These digital inventions took power away from the record labels and the broadcasters. They no longer decided the tastes of nations. Now, that power rested in the hands of the people. Best of all, we have so many different songs and artists to choose from, and their availability isn't limited to the selection at your local record store or whatever the radio or MTV chooses to play. This sounds like a great thing, and in many ways, it is. For people who truly love music, like myself, it gives them the ability to indulge in a wide variety of genres and diversify their palette. But there's one problem here, and it's a problem that is not only present in gaming, but present in all forms of art. When you have millions of songs or thousands of games to choose from, and you only have so much time in the day, the vast majority of people will give their time and attention to what everybody else says is good. Though there will always be a chunk of the market that listens to a wide variety of music, the lion's share of the market will belong to those who don't have the desire to peruse through millions of songs and artists. They'll just go for whatever satisfies their immediate desires. A catchy beat, a cute singer, and it will be all the better if my friends at school or work listen to them too. There is a law in economics known as the Matthew Principle, derived from the biblical book of the same name. Matthew chapter 25, verse 29 says, "For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away." In any field of expertise, around 1% or less will be given all the fame and glory, while 99% will struggle to get a smidgen. If Spotify has 12 million songs uploaded to its service every year, that means roughly 120,000 of those songs will get continuous traffic, leaving the other 99% to, as I said, only get a smidgen. And what determines the popularity of those songs will come down to a consensus, but primarily to marketing. If you are willing to cough up the cash to advertise, then you might have a chance to capture the fleeting attention of the modern consumer. That's not a criticism of the
Hmm.
modern consumer, by the way. If there are millions of songs to choose from, how would you know where to start? Maybe you'd start with whatever artist is in your face right now. Unfortunately, indie bands don't have that kind of advertising money where record labels do. Unless you have a hook like an attractive singer, a beat that drills its way into your subconscious, or your music is as good as some of the greatest artists that ever lived, then you're screwed. Even if you have these things, you're still not guaranteed success unless you have a large marketing budget. If you're a rock band, you will have to either be as good as Led Zeppelin, sound like Led Zeppelin, or have a catchy hook that a record label thinks they can market. And again, in that case, only 1% will make it. But even then, you will never be as big as Nirvana was. Now, as for how this applies to the world of gaming, sorry this took so long, the Matthew Principle is responsible for why we will never get another Splinter Cell. Like with music, there are are so many different games that we can choose from, and the majority of people don't have the time or the desire to try out a number of them. Not only that, they don't have the money. Unlike music, where you can listen to a lot of it for free
So,
with
fly
barely
guy.
any effort, games and
Oh
gaming
shit, I'm being
systems
raided?
are ridiculously expensive. Plus, most people don't have time to sit down and play
What's up,
games for
everybody?
hours on end. It's not like music where you can just put your earbuds in.
Y'all caught me as I'm starting this piece over here. And I'm just listening to a Max Derop video talking about, well, right now he's kind of talking about rock bands and like the history of them and why they kind of went away from some video that he watched. But he's going to end up relating it to why, well, at least what he's saying in his video is that we'll never see another Splinter Cell game again. And, you know, Splinter Cell was a game I used to play back in the day. So it just kind of caught my attention. So yeah, I'm listening to that, and then I'm drawing this portrait of this old photo bash that I did a while back of this character that I've been working on. One of my characters. So I just finished this series last night. I finished up this page, and yeah, just moving on here. So yeah, welcome.
No, games eat up your time and your productivity. For most people, if they're going to get into the world of gaming, they're going to seriously take their time and their money into account.
Yep.
Like with music, they will go for games that appear to be popular and which appear to have good reviews. Gaming companies know this, and so they funnel all their money and all their talent into the most popular franchises, ones that are sure to give them a return on their investment. This is why companies like Activision Blizzard barely gave any support to the team working on the Warcraft 3 remaster. Instead, they opted to give money to games that were more likely to make them the biggest profits, that being Diablo 4 and Overwatch 2. This is why Toys for Bob, who were responsible for the excellent Spyro Reignited trilogy and Crash Bandicoot 4, are now support developers for Call of Duty Warzone, which in effect has likely killed development on Spyro 4. Rest in peace. It's understandable to a certain extent. Unlike music, game design is much more complicated, much more expensive, and takes up much more time, usually, than music production. Why would a company put years of their life and millions of dollars into a single-player experience that doesn't generate continuous revenue and only sells a few million copies? That's a risky investment. Why wouldn't they put all their efforts into the big franchises that sell tens of millions of copies on an annual basis, which they can also infuse with microtransactions and loot boxes? Again, this is why games like Overwatch 2 and Call of Duty Warzone get all the attention. We might think that single-player experiences are more desirable. We might think that everybody is clamoring for a new Splinter Cell or a new Silent Hill, and granted, there are millions of people that are doing that, myself included. However, the numbers of people who are clamoring for single-player experiences pale in comparison to the vast majority of gamers who aren't as invested, who are just looking to spend their hard-earned cash on whatever can give them the greatest high. This is why Battle Royale games are so popular and generate so much money. They are always intense. Everybody is playing them, and they make so much money with their in-app purchases. Call of Duty Mobile, for example, made $30 million last May, simply from microtransactions.
Dang.
Games like Splinter Cell and Silent Hill pale in comparison in terms of copies sold and revenue gained. Don't believe me? Let's look at the sales numbers for Ubisoft's most popular games and see how they compare to Splinter Cell and Konami's Silent Hill. Assassin's Creed Odyssey, a very recognizable brand with lots of microtransactions. That game came out in 2019 and sold over 10 million copies. The Division 2 came out in 2019, loaded with microtransactions. Also sold over 10 million copies. Rainbow Six Siege came out in 2015, currently loaded with microtransactions, had roughly 50 million registered players in 2019 with over $1 billion in revenue. Now, how many units did the two most recent Splinter Cell games sell? Splinter Cell Blacklist and Splinter Cell Conviction both sold somewhere between 2 to 3 million copies respectively. Those games took a lot of time and effort to make. Even though a lot of people didn't like those games compared to games like Pandora Tomorrow or Chaos Theory, they nonetheless required a lot of effort in regards to coding, graphics, the usual. Those games do not have microtransactions, and thus do not generate continuous revenue. To all those who, like me, desperately want another Silent Hill game, take a guess as to how many copies the entire franchise has sold. Not just one game, the entire franchise. Konami estimates that the entire franchise has sold slightly less than 10 million copies. Assassin's Creed Odyssey sold more than 10 million copies with a single release, and likely made more money than the entire Silent Hill franchise combined if you take the microtransaction revenue into account. So where is the incentive to put millions of dollars and hundreds of talented people to work on those franchises? People aren't spending money on them the way they spend money on games like Assassin's Creed, or Call of Duty, or Fortnite, or FIFA. Now granted, it is looking extremely likely that Konami is getting Bloober Team to work on a new Silent Hill game. But even then, people aren't particularly happy about that because not everybody likes the games that Bloober Team have put out, myself included. Who is to say that we won't get another type of situation like we got with Warcraft 3 Reforged, where they have less talent and a smaller budget, and thus we get a game of lesser quality? It works out well for Konami because they don't have to spend as much money on a game and they get to reap the residual benefits. But there's a good chance it won't work out well for massive fans of the franchise like myself. What will likely happen with a game like Splinter Cell or another Ubisoft franchise like Prince of Persia is that they will sit on the franchise and wait until a time comes where those franchises become financially viable like they once were. Maybe a time will
It's
come where the
business.
market embraces single-player games over live services, and I believe that it's possible to get there. One thing you could do is share this video around, but I'd like to provide you with something a little bit less self-serving. If you'd like to demonstrate your love for traditional single-player and multiplayer experiences and your distaste for microtransactions and other crappy business practices, now is your chance to send a message. I'm sure that you've been hearing about the controversies surrounding Activision Blizzard over the past week. They are currently being sued by the state of California for pervasive sexual harassment in the workplace. This is the worst in a long line of bad behavior coming out of the company in recent years. Remember, this is the same company that bent the knee to the Chinese Communist Party when one of their competitive players, Blitzchung, expressed support for the Hong Kong democracy protesters. This is the same company who introduced the concept of loot boxes into gaming with the first Overwatch. And like I said before, this is the same company who not only messed up Warcraft 3's remaster, but they put it out, knowing that it would be in an abysmal state, and accepted pre-orders nonetheless. If you want to see the games industry move in the right direction, share videos on that controversy with other people. I'll put links to some videos that you can share in the description box below. Tell people not to give Blizzard their business. When Diablo 4 and Overwatch 2 come out, don't buy them. If you're playing World of Warcraft, do what a lot of people are doing right now, where you cancel your subscription and move over to Final Fantasy XIV. There are a lot of other things you can do as well, beyond sticking it to this particular company. And I know you guys have plenty of ideas. Leave them in the comment section below so we can keep the conversation going. Thanks for indulging me, guys. Now I'll get back to work on the next Answer to Job video. Until that video releases, just make sure to stay yellow, you hear?
Chips Ahoy handcrafted beverages, now at Wawa.
Okay, so now we're getting into a Metal Gear 3 video by one of my favorite Future Sound Productions. I love this guy's videos. And he did like I don't know how many parts to the series, but it's basically like what happened in Metal Gear 3. Uh, so yeah, it's yeah, let's let that rock.
Welcome to another installment in What Even Happens in MGS. Given how popular the MGS-V trilogy turned out to be, I've decided to keep things rolling for the rest of the series. We'll start off with the first game chronologically, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. We'll also be doing some scene and dialogue analysis as well as the usual explanation later on. It'll take several parts to cover each game, okay? With that being said, please consider liking and subscribing so that now we can begin. MGS3 is split in two, Virtuous Mission and Operation Snake Eater. The game takes place in 1964 at the height of the Cold War. MGS3 tells the origin story of the man who will become known as Big Boss and the shadowy secret society who ruled the world, revealed by MGS2 as the Patriots. Now, MGS3 has a lot of layers to it, because as a prequel, it isn't just a self-contained story. It's covertly also a story about where everything in every other Metal Gear game comes from. Characters and events, in other words, resonate with the wider series lore in ways that aren't always explicit. That's important to keep in mind going forward. Virtuous Mission is about how the original Snake tries to extract an important Soviet scientist from behind enemy lines, while Snake Eater is about Snake's follow-up mission to destroy an insurrection against the Soviet Union that threatens the entire world. Along the way, this involves eliminating a giant nuclear weapons platform, the Shagohod, and also every last member of a formerly legendary World War II era Special Forces unit led by Snake's own mentor, the Boss. Now, with the basics out of the way, we can dive in. A brilliant Russian scientist, Nikolai Sokolov, has been caught up in a power struggle within the Soviet Union, one between the military and the government. Sokolov was responsible for the rocket engine that got history's first cosmonaut, Yuri Gagarin, into space. And now he's being used as a pawn in a much wider game. Sokolov was forced to move from rocket research to missiles and grew so terrified of his own creation, he tried to defect. But Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev retaliated by instigating the Cuban Missile Crisis just to get him back. And now, a new missile platform Sokolov's been forced to build is ready for field testing. In Virtuous Mission, you must infiltrate a remote Soviet research and development region named Selenoyarsk, where, in the Virgin Cliffs, Sokolov has been temporarily moved to await the test. After rendezvousing with Sokolov, you learn that there's another group who intend to extract him from KGB care, the Soviet group, and leading them a dangerous insurrectionist named Yevgeny Volgin. Volgin sends in a Spetsnaz outfit to capture Sokolov, one named after their trick-shooting commander, Major Ocelot. Snake deals with them while leaving Ocelot alive, and with that, it seems all that's left to complete the mission is exfiltration with Sokolov using a Fulton balloon. But then come a series of devastations that leave not only the mission, but your unit, Fox, and the fate of the entire world in shambles. First, we get a hold of Sokolov's weapon, the Shagohod, which can fire nukes as a standalone platform even from mountainous terrain. It isn't complete yet at the development level of Stage 1, but by Stage 2, it'll have the potential, just by existing, to single-handedly turn the Cold War hot. Then, Snake's estranged but still beloved mentor, the Boss, shows up, carrying 2 prototype portable nuclear launchers. She announces that she's defecting, not just to the Soviet Union, but to the forces of Volgin's coming coup d'etat. And she's doing so arm in arm with the remaining members of her legendary World War II era unit, the Cobras. the boss completely overpowers you, throwing Snake into the river and capturing Sokolov, who you've just delivered to Volgan's unit for them. And then, Volgan, using one of the boss's gifts, nukes Sokolov's research lab, completely blowing the secrecy of this sensitive and failed operation. And by that point, the virtuous mission will have officially ended in total failure. In the future, both of the burgeoning unit within the CIA you work for, Unit Fox, as well as that of the entire world, will depend completely on Snake's one and only shot at redemption, Operation Snakeeater. So that does it for the synopsis of the virtuous mission. Now we can really get into its analysis and investigation.
Yeah, I love this guy's videos, man. He's gone on to do magic with the Metal Gear series as far as like research and putting essays together.
Century, the true holders of power in the United States, the Republic of China, and the newly formed Soviet Union gathered together in a secret meeting that would later be known as the Wiseman's Committee. The secret pact they formed there marked the beginning of the philosophers. But the last of the original members died in the 1930s. After that, the organization began to run out of control, and the Wiseman's Committee degenerated into a mere shell of its former self.
During the last Great War, the most powerful men in America, China, and the Soviet Union had a secret pact. The pact was a blueprint for defeating the Axis powers and creating a new world order. To secure victory in the war, the three countries pooled their resources, conduct the most covert types of operations and research. The atomic bomb, rocket technology, the Cobra unit. And they amassed an enormous sum of money to fund these projects, enough to fight the war 5 times over. That wealth is the philosopher's legacy.
The philosophers once had the potential to rule the world and abolish war for good. But ever since the Second World War, they've been ripped apart as newer generations within their ranks failed to reach the same unity that the organization's founding fathers envisioned. With the virtuous mission, the American philosophers seem to be trying to force a crisis within the Soviet ranks, to sneak in amid the chaos and get their hands on the secret black budget amassed to determine the course of war over the next century, known as the philosopher's legacy. That legacy is being hoarded by a rebel within the Soviet bureaucracy, a madman named Yevgeny Volgan. His father, a member of the Soviet branch of the philosophers, had been responsible for hiding the legacy's existence during the war. He had used this opportunity to attempt to ensure only the Soviets would be able to recover it once the war was over. And now his son, Yevgeny Volgan, is the only one on Earth who really knows where the bank records containing the legacy can be found. That means that ever since Stalin's death in 1954, Stalin's replacement, Nikita Khrushchev, has not had access to the legacy. Khrushchev has been trying to defeat the Americans technologically anyway, with projects like the Vostok rocket that Sokolov here built. Sokolov now has been tasked with building a certain new weapons platform that will utilize some of the same principles and technology as the Vostok rocket, but in a weaponized form.
A certain Soviet scientist requested asylum in the West through one of our moles. His name is Nikolai Stepanovich Sokolov. He's head of the OKB 754 Design Bureau, one of the Soviets' top secret weapon research facilities, and the East's foremost expert on weapons development.
Cyril got Sokolov out the first time on foot, arranging for him to travel from OKB This was after Sokolov's family were brought over by moles. By the time Sokolov arrived, after 2 weeks and over 600 miles, he had to be hospitalized. And then came the crisis in Cuba. Officially, the crisis was averted by America's agreement to pull its intermediate-range ballistic missiles that menaced the Soviet Union from Turkey. But this was only a ruse to throw intelligence agencies around the world off from the real arrangement returning Sokolov. Ever since the debacle of Sokolov's defection in 1962, the man who supposedly was in charge of getting him out, a British former secret intelligence officer known as Major Zero, has been developing a new kind of special forces unit to get him out again.
In the 2 years since Sokolov's asylum operation, I spent all my time making preparations. Now is the time to show some results.
That's your unit, Unit Fox. You are the first Fox field officer, codenamed Navy Snake, a former Green Beret and veteran of the Korean War. Though Fox is disliked by the higher-ups at its mother outfit, the CIA, Zero has chosen the re-rescue of Sokolov as the mission to prove the unit's value as a standalone paramilitary force. Sokolov's been developing the Shagohod for Khrushchev in order for the desperate Soviet premier to appease his critics. Thanks to his pursuit of peaceful coexistence with the West in the wake of the missile crisis and Khrushchev's failed agricultural policies, he's in trouble with the military and provincial leadership.
Ever since the withdrawal from Cuba, Khrushchev's position has been getting weaker day by day. This secret test is an act of desperation by a cornered man.
That's why he's giving Sokolov's project his full support, and why he triggered the incident in Cuba just to get him back. Since his success with the Vostok rocket, Sokolov's been forced to work inside the most secretive of all the secret Soviet-designed bureaus, OKB-754. The only reason Fox has learned of the details of this upcoming field test and Sokolov's location is thanks to an underground spy network Zero tells us belongs to our mentor, the boss.
So you have absolutely no idea what Sokolov is developing?
We've got nothing.
Then how did you get the information for this mission? It can't have been from Sokolov.
From the boss.
Boss?
That's right. She has her own intelligence channels, which she cultivated during the last war. She shared what she learned with us.
In actuality, it was built prior to the end of the war by the philosophers. The area you begin Virtuous Mission in is outside the enemy's patrol route, but the closer you get to Sokolov and the abandoned factory, the more you encounter operatives of the KGB. They're from the 9th Directorate, an elite KGB division responsible usually only for senior government officials and VIPs. They're here because their director is a protege of Khrushchev's, and the premier is running out of people that he knows he can trust.
If nothing else, the completion of Sokolov's new weapon in this test should help re-establish Khrushchev's authority in Moscow.
So what you're saying is, there's also a good chance that whoever doesn't want to see that happen is going to try and interfere.
Most likely, Khrushchev must have anticipated this and sent his most loyal unit as trump card to make sure that all goes well.
Virtuous Mission tasks you with infiltrating an abandoned industrial zone in the Virgin Cliffs, located 3 miles away from Sokolov's research bureau, where he's been working on the Shagohod, OKB-754. Interestingly enough, the old factory area is named Rassvet, or Sunrise. In the Phantom Pain, this is the same meaning, according to Ocelot, behind the name of the village where the Soviets are holding Miller, Wande. Anyway, it seems many of the animals that you encounter in Selenium Yars that aren't native to the region were flown in here from all over the world for some sort of research. And some of them have been exposed, thanks to the nuclear testing here, to radiation, which has changed some of their behavior. Like the Indian gavials, for example. This little detail seems to foreshadow the revelation that will come that both Snake and the boss have been subjects to nuclear experimentation, and hint to the idea that the entire game is some sort of experiment in of itself. But all of the research and development going on in this region, surrounding and inside Selenium Yars, is a closely guarded secret. The only thing Zero claims to know at the start of the game is that Sokolov's been taken prisoner and forced to work on this big secret weapon forced by the KGB. Zero speculates it has some relation to recent Soviet nuclear tests at the infamous site Semipalatinsk, aka the Polygon. Sokolov has been moved to Rastavec to await this new platform's first field testing. When you meet up, he explains that his KGB retinue has orders to kill him rather than allow Sokolov to be captured by the Gru and Volgin. Khrushchev knows Volgin is likely to intervene. Terrified of what Volgin is capable of with Sokolov's own creation, when we first find the scientist, this is why he's burning his own research materials.
Ooh.
Commencing virtuous mission now.
Not only does this name give us a nod to the presence and earlier titles of VR missions, it's a great bit of foreshadowing as well as characterization at the same time. The similarity with the name Virtual Mission hints that this will be something of a staged production, a contrived, artificial event.
The head of the CIA has finally given us the green light for the virtuous mission.
Virtual mission?
No, the virtuous mission. The future of our Fox unit depends on it. If it succeeds, we'll be officially organized into a unit.
Virtuous mission. Sounds like some kind of initiation ritual.
And the word virtuous is directly relevant to the theme of this game, the changing times, and the manipulation of values over history.
Enemies change along with the times, the flow of the ages, and we soldiers are forced to play along.
One early line that conveys this with great irony is Major Zero's,
This is one of the history books. The world's first halo jump.
this is one for the history books. Isn't this supposed to be a top secret mission? Not only does this line hint that this mission is going to end in failure and therefore be revealed to the world, it also hints that history in the MGS universe will be written or omitted not according to true events and how they actually transpire, but by the whim of shadowy power mongers behind the scenes. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The Virtuous mission, we're told, is the first field mission of a new covert operating group within the CIA called Unit Fox. Again, we're bumping into the theme. Technically, Unit Fox does not yet have permission to exist as a standalone outfit. Whether it can is something that the Virtuous mission is meant to prove. This is a trial run. Now, what won't be divulged until the end is that Unit Fox was formed in 1962 following the boss's own version of Snake Eater, her mission to kill the Soviet operative and her former comrade, the Sorrow. It's a long story, but essentially, the boss, the Sorrow, and Major Zero, along with a handful of other unusual commandos known collectively as the Cobras, all fought together on the same side, and all but single-handedly helped turn the tide of the war, World War II. But that was then, and this, the Cold War, are the times today. And that meant that the boss and the Sorrow, despite having been comrades and even having reproduced together, were set at the end of the war
Reproduced.
at odds. They were wrapped up in the early space race, and though neither realized it, they were fighting each other through a secret game of spy versus spy, long before they actually met each other face to face on the battlefield as enemies in 1962. The boss, aka Joy, had planted a mole in the Soviet space program, but then the Sorrow flipped this asset to the Soviet side, which is why the Russians beat the West to space with Sputnik in 1957. The boss tried to make up for this failure by volunteering for the early NASA project as a member of the Mercury team, who were in a race against the Soviets to be the first humans to make it into space. But thanks to higher-ups rushing her spacecraft out of development, something went wrong during the landing, and the boss, already exposed to dangerous levels of cosmic radiation during the trip, nearly died getting back to Earth. Technically, secretly, he was the first person in the MGS universe to make it to space, not Yuri Gagarin. All of this took place after she and Snake met and became closer than words can express in the 1950s. The boss abruptly disappeared from Snake's life in June of 1959. In the gap of time between then and the Virtuous mission, she flew to space, fell into a coma, and then, in 1962, came to this very place in Soviet territory, Selenoyarsk, to kill the Sorrow. In exchange for the life of their son, Adamska, aka Revolver Ocelot.
Damn.
Who was being held hostage by members of a shadowy organization formerly known as the Philosophers. An organization that Joy's own father was among the founding members of, before they killed him.
Jack, is that you? How many years is it now?
Boss?
That's right. It's me.
So what brings Joy back in contact with Snake now for the Virtuous mission? Well, it's simple. The Virtuous mission has been timed to coincide with the conclusion of this new platform's Phase 1. Right at the point snatching Sokolov will be the most tempting to Volgin, who plans now to defy Khrushchev and stage a coup not only against the Soviet Union, but the entire world. This coup has been building for some time, at least since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Backed by the Soviet Army and Khrushchev's rival, Leonid Brezhnev, Volgin has pitted the Soviet GRU against their rivals, the KGB. Volgin also originally was working with Sokolov's rival, the weapons engineer Alexander Granin. Quietly, Volgin converted a former Soviet prison in Selenoyarsk into Granin's very own design bureau. Ironically, Sokolov sent to the exact same place, Selenoyarsk, and given his own research bureau by Khrushchev to provide the Soviet premier with a weapon to stand up, not only to the West, but perhaps to the Soviet army and Volgin as well. Granin's project for Volgin would have been a bipedal weapons platform to serve as the missing link between infantry and artillery, combining them into a single machine. This machine, Granin would have called Metal Gear. Granin decided to work for Volgin despite Khrushchev for choosing Sokolov, and because he's aware that Volgin has access to unlimited funds. Until the Virtuous mission, Granin's Metal Gear was being developed as something of the rival to Sokolov's parallel platform projects, the Walker, the Treading Behemoth, or Shagohod. But now that Phase 1 of the Shagohod's development is actually complete, and Granin has yet to complete even a prototype, Volgin decides he doesn't care for Granin's Metal Gear anymore. And now wants the Shagohod, wants to steal it from Khrushchev. But because he doesn't want Khrushchev to even know how to build another one without Sokolov, Volgin resolves to not only kidnap the scientist, but destroy his research facility. However, in something of a nod to the events of Metal Gear 87, Volgin will have to maintain his cover of loyalty to the Soviet Union. If he's going to destroy Sokolov's research plant and covertly start preparations for his coup d'etat with the Shagohod as its linchpin, Volgin needs someone to pin these events on, a patsy, and that's where the boss comes in. Well, actually, the boss's handlers in Washington are already scheming to use her as a mole by staging a defection to Volgin's ranks. They'll be tricked somewhat when the weapon that they give the boss to provide Volgin to prove her loyalty and the sincerity of her defection
is used.
To destroy Sokolov's lab.
Yeah.
This ruse that wildly gets out of hand was originally to steal the legacy, and in the process, for the boss to set into motion the endgame for the Cold War by recovering the funds and reuniting the philosophers only as an American organization. By doing so, the boss had the potential to guarantee that the U.S. would emerge from the Cold War as the winner and the sole global superpower. This scheme was hatched when Volgin, using a still operational spy network first cultivated by the philosophers when they were still united, contacted the boss with the proposal of defecting. Perhaps Volgin believed the boss was petty enough to want revenge for being forced to kill the Sorrow. He certainly has no clue that Ocelot, her son, is, all appearances to the contrary, actually working for the Americans. It's implied out of loyalty to her, his mother. At any rate, everything I've just explained is happening completely behind the scenes in Virtuous Mission. But there's an even deeper layer, one that goes right to the center of things and the real objectives behind what will become known as Operation Snake Eater. The boss was created by the philosophers, a group who continues to exist only basically in name, whose originators all died in the 1930s. She was created with one purpose, to serve as ground zero for something like a chain reaction, to spawn children and, from them, whole generations of copies and descendants and successors, all to keep going an endless cycle of wars across the globe, a cycle that will keep the world in the philosopher's hands. Her mission, her secret mission, in other words, is to help construct a system, a program, keeping alive their shapeless, formless status quo. The real reason Snake is sent on first the Virtuous Mission and then Operation Snake Eater is to replace the boss. As her first disciple, forming from her a pattern of others all made in her image. Just like her, these followers in her footsteps will begin as legendary heroes only to wind up dead as pariahs. All the while secretly serving the true will of, in loyalty to, the heirs of the philosophers. And this is going to be a group to come, known first as Cypher, then finally as the Patriots. Words, the boss explains that the biggest thing standing in Snake's way of replacing her is his need for a reason to fight. That's the difference, she says, between a fighter and a soldier. It's part of why he feels so abandoned by her disappearance. He doesn't yet understand what the events of the game have to teach him. That a soldier has no room for human attachments, especially not to a fellow soldier. Or rather, that sense of attachment can only come through devotion towards a particular mission, a devotion that is unquestioning and eternal. In this regard, soldiers are two things that Snake has to become by the end of Snake Eater. Instruments of power, but also its priests. It isn't enough just to carry out a mission, in other words. Snake must be taught how to believe in it, so totally that the instant it changes, former friends can become enemies, and white become black. He'll adapt with just the same degree of belief and devotion as before, and just as instantly. This is very important here.
Drift away. My place is with them now.
The river is a metaphor for the changing and moving stream of time, or rather, the times. It's because there's no place for the boss or her cobras in the times of tomorrow that they've chosen instead to die for their mission. All her dialogue to Snake earlier in the game is just as crucial to grasping this point, and the wider point that MGS3 wants to make about moral, cultural, and historical relativism.
Listen to me, Jack. Just because soldiers are on the same side right now doesn't mean they always will be. Having personal feelings about your comrades is one of the worst sins you can commit. Politics determine who you face on the battlefield. And politics are a living thing. They change along with the times. Yesterday's good might be tomorrow's evil.
Is that why you abandoned me?
No, it had nothing to do with you. I already
Damn.
told you, Jack. I was on a top secret mission.
This This all goes back to World War I, famously christened the war to end all wars. Now, today this phrase might sound like it's referring to the violence and extremity of World War I, but originally this phrase meant something more utopian. It was envisioned as a war to bring an end to all wars once and for all. In the NGS universe, how this was achieved was quite literally by weaponizing war against itself, so that a new world order could be constructed that no one could have the power to oppose, that by trying to oppose, one unwittingly serves. War would become part of how this status quo would maintain its balance. A war, as Orwell put it, as peace. This is the true nature of everything that happens in MGS3. It's all part of a war that's really just serving the very status quo it's meant to ostensibly threaten, at least in the mind of the one who thinks he's really fighting it, Volgin. His little rebellion is merely the fodder for the philosophers to reunite, not as an international group spread across the major world powers,
But united.
but localized only in America,
Damn.
to reform as the covert entity that will control world events for the next century, led by Major Zero, Cypher, and much later known as the Patriots. Snake tells Sokolov a sort of code phrase to prove he's working as Zero's proxy, and that also sort of tricks the player into thinking that Zero's a benevolent hero, a trustworthy figure. Now, it wasn't kept consistent in localization, but in the native Japanese, it's implied here that this phrase is the origin behind Snake's famous catchphrase, which we know better in the West as "kept you waiting, huh?" Volgin is the prototype for the man who will become Big Boss in many ways. He's secretly plotting to carry out a version of the military rebellion that, years later, Big Boss will attempt himself throughout the events of the MSX games. But this won't become clear until more of Volgin's plans come to light. For now, all we're told is that Volgin is a key player in the Red Army's extremist anti-Khrushchev faction, who disapprove of the government's post-Cuban Missile Crisis policy of pursuing peaceful coexistence with the West. Later on, we'll also learn that Volgin is a radical Russian nationalist who's committed war crimes and crushed rebellions in satellite states. In other words, he's a monster who's been useful to the Soviet Union, but now has become more and more unhinged. It's clear why Sokolov can't fall into Volgin's blood-stained hands. But as soon as Snake tries to exfil, you come face to face with the commander of the Bruise Ocelot unit, Major Ocelot, which I already briefly mentioned. It seems that most of what happens in this scene is somewhat of a ruse. Ocelot is merely testing Snake, the man that he knows will soon become the next boss, working, as Ocelot is, secretly as a triple agent for the American government. I think Ocelot really does try to shoot Snake here, using the untested technique he's only read about, trying to show off. His relationship with Snake is somewhat complex throughout the game, to say nothing of the complexity of Ocelot's true objectives behind the scenes. But the best way to think of the two is like brothers. There's a rivalry, yet a camaraderie and mutual understanding and respect, too. Snake really does teach Ocelot a lot along the way, constantly surprising him with genuine integrity and good-naturedness. Yet Snake also humiliates him, often in front of others. So there's a bit of a brotherly grudge brewing as well. The big clue that the project of turning Snake into the next boss is already underway during Virtuous Mission is in how Ocelot claims that he was expecting Sokolov's rescuer to be the legendary hero, the Boss. Is it really possible Ocelot has yet to learn the real boss is a woman, not to mention that she's his own mother? And wouldn't Ocelot have already been told the boss has defected to Volgin's unit? Nothing about this makes much sense unless getting past the Ocelot unit was actually part of Snake's first test, part of his initiation ritual. By the end, we'll learn that Ocelot has assumed the identity of one of two former NSA defectors who the KGB believes are working for them inside Volgin's outfit as double agents. In reality, though, Ocelot is a triple agent, loyal to neither side of the Soviet inter-service conflict, but to the CIA. Ocelot is also buying time for what happens next, which I believe was predetermined. determined before the start of the virtuous mission, even though we're presented these events as if they were completely unexpected. I think that Major Zero understood fully well that the boss was going to defect, well before she actually does so. At the perfect time, the boss appears out of the mist, carrying the Davy Crockett portable nukes for Volgan. And this is when we learn that she, along with the Cobras, are defecting to Volgan's side. However, in reality, they've all signed up for nothing more than a suicide mission, one where each one of them in turn will sacrifice themselves to secretly support Snake's true mission objectives, as well as teaching him things that he'll need on his way to becoming Big Boss.
Is he crying?
So sad.
It may be hard to tell, but in between Snake getting tossed into the river and waking up after washing up on shore, several hours pass. It's implied that in this time, Volgan and the Cobras have raided the KGB to steal the Shagohod, as well as capture the woman that they believe to be Sokolov's mistress.
Eva?
No, that's not her name. Her name is Tatiana.
How long has Tatiana been here?
Only a few weeks.
A few days before the virtuous mission, then.
It seems this woman, Tatiana, was snatched by the Ocelot unit, who are the only other passengers in Volgan's Hind. Now, there's not much we can say for sure about how Tatiana, who will later, of course, meet as the spy secretly working for the Chinese philosophers Eva, winds up in Volgan's chopper. Was she grabbed along with the Shagohod at the mountain testing site, or did the rebellion sneak her out of Sokolov's research bureau? It may not really matter, because if you notice, what actually matters here is how the person responsible for her being here is Ocelot.
Apparently she's Sokolov's woman. Her kisses of death. You KGB.
Ocelot, working unbeknownst to Eva to help her plant her cover story more convincingly as a KGB spy, is actually playing China's rivalry with the Soviet Union against both sides. This is also lure Eva into stealing a fake of the film containing the whereabouts of the philosopher's legacy. Ocelot will also use his cover story as Adam, the NSA defector, to provide Eva the opportunity to masquerade as the second defector, who actually may or may not have ever even existed, codenamed Eva. It will be necessary to feed Snake valuable intel and support, almost like apples, which she won't even realize that she's doing in service to the Americans.
The real Adam never showed up at the meeting place, saving me the trouble of having to eliminate him.
Yes, it appears that no one knew that I was Adam.
After beating Snake within an inch of his life, the way that the boss takes Sokolov seems to be a nod to MGS1, in how, in both these scenarios, you unwittingly deliver the very thing that you were supposed to prevent the enemy from getting to them on a silver platter. And all of this, I believe, is going according, as I mentioned, to a predefined plan. One of the reasons that Volgan nukes the development facility is presumably to double-check that the boss isn't lying to him, which ensures that she can't go back home. In an instant, the boss has turned from an international symbol of heroism to an international pariah. Now, supposedly, even by the end of the game, we're being told the idea that the CIA didn't anticipate Volgan using the nuke, but I'm not entirely convinced this is so. This nuclear strike catalyzes the very rippling changes to the times that the boss, from the very start, seems to already know are coming. Whatever the truth, though, this nuclear explosion sets into motion not only the boss becoming evil on the outside to the world, but also Snake, by killing her only to learn by the end that she remained loyal the whole time, becoming evil on the inside, becoming the chimerical combination of the boss and Volgin that we'll later know and fear as Big Boss. This theme of the times, or context, MGS3's developers represented with the theme word scene. Now, one way that MGS3 plays with this central theme of scene is as a prequel.
There's one sentry on the left and one on the right. They're armed with 5.56ers, pineapples.
I've sighted an enemy sentry. AN-94 and a Makarov.
I've spotted 2 enemy soldiers. AK-47s and grenades. Anyone going with me?
As usual, this is a one-man infiltration mission.
Weapons and equipment OSP.
Yes, this is a top-secret black op. Don't expect any official support.
Is this a joint effort?
No. Foxhound remains a covert body. Don't alert them to your presence. That is an order.
This will be a sneaking mission. You must not be seen by the enemy. You must leave no trace of your presence. Is that clear? This kind of infiltration is the Fox unit's speciality. In other words, weapons and equipment are procure on site. That goes for food as well.
There are dynamics here that we recognize. For starters, there's Naked Snake's similarities with the protagonist of MGS2, who was also named Jack.
This can't be happening.
It's like being in a nightmare you can't wake up from.
Jack, snap out of it.
The way the boss is introduced through the codec after we're given a short moment of warming up, and how much that this throws Jack off, is a solid mimicry of how the dynamic in MGS2 got introduced between Jack and Rose. Then there's the familiarity of not Naomi, like MGS1, but paramedic. She too flirts with us and goes into crazy detail describing science and medicine. And there are other little references into other games as well, like the plane that resembles the one that we see at the start of the NES version of Metal Gear 1, or the sub off the coast of Alaska that starts MGS1. But despite these similarities, there's also something different in all of these examples of deja vu, too. They're in the wrong context. The boss is nothing like Rosemary, and Paramedic, unlike Naomi, isn't secretly scheming to get revenge against us.
Get down.
The things that have shown back up in the past, you see, haven't shown back up in their, if you'll pardon the irony, original context. Hell, just look at how Naked Snake both is and is not just like Solid Snake. All these awesomely ironic twists are not only subtly meta-referential, they're driving home the central theme about changes, not so much simply changes over time, but within the times themselves. And by the times, I just mean the status quo, what matters, what's meaningful, relative to a specific era. And we'll return to this question of the times as time goes by. One thing that certainly never seems to change throughout the times, though, is the dynamic of Snake, whichever Snake in whatever era we're looking at, getting used and manipulated. There are hints and little signature Kojima-style bits of foreshadowing to this effect, like how Zero and Paramedic share this knowing glance. It almost feels much like MGS2 that the events of MGS3 are some kind of psychology experiment, a single blind study that we, the player, as well as our player character, Snake, are kept in the dark about. There are other, subtler details and hanging threads that seem intentionally left dangling for us to notice and suspect. One is, why did Fox put their logo all over the plane and even on Snake's parachute? If this mission really was only supposed to last 4 hours, why did Fox go to the trouble of assembling a field guide on all the plants and animals? Why was there conveniently some sort of animal version of the Great Escape from a laboratory in the region, filling it with a diverse plethora of edible animals? And speaking of, one example that we see of change over time on a personal level for Snake is how he'll develop more of a taste for eating wild animals. In some ways, his story is about a loss of innocence, just as the story of Adam and Eve symbolized the same thing through consumption of food. MGS3 is about a conversion of both heart and mind. Obviously, it's possible to overthink things and miss their actual purpose by doing so, especially in Kojima's games where you can never feel too sure about anything. But the only reason that I mention this stuff about eating at all is yet another ironic line by Zero.
If all goes well, it shouldn't take more than a few hours. Home in time for dinner.
But if anything goes wrong, you'll be eating dinner, breakfast, and all the rest of your meals in the jungle.
Zero has quite a few lines that seem to be private and very mean-spirited jokes at our expense, told in a dry and characteristically English, passive-aggressive way.
Speaking of snakes, you remember the boss, don't you? As long as you've got a legendary hero backing you up, you'll be fine. Isn't that right, Snake? This mission would never have come together without the boss's help in a number of respects. You're a ghost, Snake, in every sense of the word.
Another way that this theme of the times and how they change is conveyed is through the very name Snake itself. Though Snake starts out in our eyes a hero, the hero that we've heard about in all the other games, the legend, whom we know will one day become Big Boss, by the end of MGS3, he'll have shed his skin and become a sort of unwilling villain, but also victim, a man without much control, a man who gets tricked. The value, the virtue, the context of Big Boss himself is something that we'll see changing with the times. Notice that Zero uses the boss to cover his own sins no less opportunistically than Volgin. Throughout the virtuous mission, Zero puts everything on the boss. All of this is apparently designed to make her cover story of defection and betrayal not only more convincing, but more devastating for Snake. For example, Zero says it was the boss's connections with the Director of Central Intelligence that got him to authorize Unit Fox's first mission. He also says it was her access to her very own underground espionage network that was cultivated during the war, which has enabled Fox to pinpoint Sokolov's location. And Zero uses his background in co-creating the SAS with the boss to ingratiate himself to us, using her the same way he uses his promise to Sokolov to prove his virtue and trustworthiness. That word prove is very important in MGS3, because usually it's used to subvert the very idea of proof and facts and knowable truth in situations where perception matters more than reality. As just a few examples, Volgin proves the boss isn't still in league with the US by firing the rocket. In turn, the US must quote-unquote prove it had nothing to do with Volgin getting his hands on the weapon by sending Snake to kill the boss. There are so many other examples, like when Eva will prove that she's Adam by killing the Soviets. But most of these examples will have to wait. I think that the relevance of prove here to MGS3 has to do, again, with history and the changing times, and how things that are reported and thought of as facts, as things that really took place, aren't necessarily true. We'll talk more about this and many more things should this episode get enough of your support in the follow-up. Until next time, boss.
Drink some water. Tell you, man, this guy breaks down Metal Gear like none other.
Welcome to part 2 of What Even Happens in MGS3. We'll pick up by turning now to the events of Operation Snake Eater. It's been a week since the events of the Virtuous mission. Now Snake has to destroy the Shagohod, defeat Volgin, and eliminate the Cobras, including, of course, the boss, in order to avoid all-out nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union. Along the way, you'll pair up with a fellow infiltrator that you think works for Khrushchev and the KGB, codenamed Eva. Snake has to make his way over miles of jungle and swampland, then ascend a mountain in order to reach the impregnable enemy stronghold crossing rack. This will only happen after you rendezvous with the Soviet scientist Alexander Branin and defeat several of your assassination targets. Using a disguise, Snake will finally reach Sokolov, who will tell you everything about the Shagohod's true power. But then, Snake will get exposed, captured, and tortured, losing his right eye in the process. And that's about as far as we'll get in this episode. Well, with the synopsis now out of the way, we can get into what really happened in MGS 3. Operation Snake Eater begins over the Arctic Circle, unlike the Virtuous mission, when Snake entered Soviet territory through Pakistan. In the wake of the previous debacle, the conflict within the Soviet Union has turned into a full-blown crisis. The CIA has been given 1 week to eliminate the boss and Volgin, or else Khrushchev will be deposed and the militants will retaliate against the U.S. for the destruction of Sokolov's design bureau, triggering full-scale war. Khrushchev says nothing about the Shagohod or Sokolov, so it's possible that he believes both were wiped out with the rest of Sokolov's lab. It's also possible that the Shagohod project isn't the kind of thing for Khrushchev to just openly admit the existence of to the American president. Whatever the case, the strange situation has given Snake 2 sets of objectives, one for the Soviet government, the other for the CIA. For the Soviets, assassinate the Cobras, including the boss, as well as Colonel Volgin. For the CIA, rescue Sokolov and destroy the Shagohod. The West looks guilty because Fox's combat talent was picked up on Soviet radar right before Volgin's attack. Khrushchev can't afford to assist in this wet work mission because of what it would mean for his enemies to uncover evidence of him working with America, especially if it was against Volgin, who after all is allied to the Brezhnev faction. Zero does say that you can expect some help in the field by one of 2 former NSA defectors, known as Adam and Eva, who work for the KGB. They briefly mentioned last episode, the truth of this claim is something to be doubted. Adam has apparently infiltrated Volgin's unit, according to Zero, and he's waiting for you in the same abandoned factory you met with Sokolov. But who we find waiting for us first is none other than the boss. In the week in between missions, Snake's been hospitalized in what Zero calls one of the most advanced ICUs in the world. This, ironically, is to not only provide Snake with the best medical treatment, but for the Pentagon to keep him under lock and key while subjecting him to endless interrogations. The irony of the name Virtuous Mission now becomes painfully clear. The operation has turned the boss into a symbol of badness, and now the Fox unit has to absolve themselves of the original sin of guilt by her association. Of course, Zero knows the mission to assassinate the boss will in all likelihood succeed because it is her mission to make sure that it does as well. The only question is if Snake can rise to the occasion and in the process become something of a different person. This whole debacle is a charade designed to catapult Unit Fox to the top of the food chain.
Does this mean Fox is going to die?
No. This Fox is still one step ahead of the hounds.
Zero's goal was to achieve a unity of thought and awareness. He believed that was what the boss wanted, and the rest of the Patriots followed his lead.
The effects of this ruse will be seen throughout the rest of the series, as Zero and his organization will come to replace the philosophers. In fact, speaking of coups, the boss is so beloved that there are members of the U.S. military establishment, we're told, who are considering defecting along with her.
There are even whispers that some of the less stalwart elements of the military might follow her example and defect themselves. I assume you're aware that since your last mission, several key figures within the CIA have been placed under house arrest.
Yeah.
The loss of the boss has been a painful one indeed.
That's the power of her image. By defeating her and becoming her descendant, Snake will gain a similar level of hero worship, exactly as Zero plans. These events point to a real-world conflict of interests within the CIA's dual purposes between intelligence gathering and operations. For someone like Zero, why gather intel when you can shape events and trigger chain reactions yourself? As one early official in charge of the CIA said, there's a risk the operational tail will wag the intelligence dog, and that's what's happening here.
CIA director has always frowned upon Fox. If this mission succeeds, Fox will be added to the CIA as an official unit. I intend to make Fox the leader in special operations. To that end, this mission must succeed.
Right.
And Zero's envisioning operations like this as the future of all warfare in the 21st century. Everything to come happens as a result of this mission, though, as we'll see, not everything happens according to plan. If the times are a system, Zero strives to be their origin.
And that's where Zero comes from.
Precisely. In another sense, though, it signifies a ghost, one whose true identity must remain a mystery, the primogenitor of the solo sneaking operation.
Is that so? All right then. Major Zero it is. We'll start over from square one.
From square zero. My frequency is 140.85. Oh, I almost forgot. Paramedic is with us again on this mission. And there's one more person on your support team. His name is Mr. Siggett. He's an expert on the latest in weapons and equipment technology.
One easy to miss detail when it comes to the character Sigint is his motive for joining Fox. Sigint basically tells us that as a black American, nobody else would hire him despite his brilliance, but Zero.
The Major is a man of foresight. He knew the electronic age was coming, and so he called out to me.
And you responded.
Well, I didn't have any place else to go.
You couldn't find a job.
No. None of the places where they do this kind of high-tech research would even let me in the door.
Why not? I know you've got social problems, but
Come again?
nothing. I mean, someone with your talent ought to be able to.
Yeah, well, maybe it has something to do with the fact that I'm black. The Major, though, he doesn't care about what color you are.
And Zero, one way or the other, has told Sigint that part of his objectives for changing the world are to spread communications technology as a kind of liberating force, in the pursuit of a world without borders. Sigint, in this way, is very similar, perhaps, to Otacon in MGS1, who got exploited for wanting to build something for peace. Zero will use the coming electronic age to basically rule the world by blending invisibly into the background. That kind of facelessness is a totally different context than for someone like Sigint, who wants a future where people will be able to communicate without seeing the color of each other's skin.
I don't think racism is going to go away even in the 21st century. But I want to work with computers and use them to bring people closer together. In the digital world, it doesn't matter whether you're black or white, American or Russian or whatever. Everybody's going to be the same. That's what I think.
We even learned from the timeline at the end of the game that Sigint will go on to join the organization today known as DARPA and help develop the original basis for the internet. We'll re-encounter Sigint in MGS1 as Donald Anderson, the DARPA chief. Paramedic, meanwhile, joins Fox to be on the cutting edge of where medicine and science meet operations. Thanks to the Virtuous mission, though, Paramedic stands to have her medical license revoked.
By the way, I heard you're going to lose your medical license if this mission fails.
Yes, there was talk of that, but the mission won't fail. Will it?
But she'll go on to develop her idea of parachuter medics into what will become today the modern emergency medical technician, or EMT system.
That's why you're called paramedic.
Yeah. With a unit like that, we could save a couple of lives, huh?
No,
No?
not a couple. We could save many lives.
Thanks. I think the Army needs a unit like that. And if no one else will do it, I'm going to create one myself.
On par with Alan Shepard. This is our last chance. Show your patriotism. If you fail, you'll be back in hospital bed again, waiting for the firing squad.
The line about Alan Shepard is actually foreshadowing, just as Shepard takes credit as the first American to reach space when it was really the boss. He'll take credit as the bravest soldier of the 20th century, when really, yet again, this was the boss. You'll take credit for something that would not exist had she not gotten it started. Just like at the start of Virtuous Mission, Zero uses the idea of fame and importance and history to make the medicine go down. There's deep irony in the contrast between his words and the actual activity that starts the operation. In a way, the use of a drone here by Snake is fitting. We are a drone, a mindless tool, just as these opening lines hint towards. There's even more irony and misdirection in the opening moments on the ground.
How will I know this Adam guy when I see him?
You'll know once you reach the factory. The whole area has been polluted by the fallout from that nuclear blast. No one else would dare come close.
Zero tells us we don't have to worry about any sentries in the area, yet he must know the boss lies in way ahead, precisely to call practically the whole enemy Spetsnaz force down here when she blows up your drone. After another pathetic showdown where she dismantles our handgun, the boss destroys the drone that we use to enter the area.
This is all top secret military technology. Are you telling me I'm supposed to just leave it here?
That's right.
Why?
The purpose of Operation Snake Eater is to send an American agent into the field in order to eliminate a defector and traitor, namely the boss. Part of that mission involves making sure the Soviets find out what we're doing.
So we have to leave behind some kind of evidence that the U.S. was involved.
Don't worry.
We're told point blank by Zero that the drone you used to return to Selenoyarsk is meant to be discovered by the Soviets. That means there may be actually two motives for Joy to destroy it: to get everyone's attention and to destroy the drone to prevent its high-tech instruments from winding up in the enemy's hands. The boss is here to reinforce the reality of Snake's assignment, to push Snake into accepting there's no way out of his mission to kill her.
You don't know the truth yet. But sooner or later you'll have to choose. I don't expect you to forgive me. But you can't defeat me either. You know me
Damn.
too well. Just look at that bandana. If you can't put the past behind you, you won't survive long. If we meet again, I'll kill you.
I was ambushed by the boss.
You will what?
The drone's been shot to hell. It's up in flames.
That's not good. Enemy scouts are going to come looking for you.
Yeah, I know. But what was the boss doing here in the first place? There's got to be a leak somewhere.
Well, that's impossible.
Zero pretends he has no idea how the boss learned enough to lie in wait for you miles away from Brosnygrad. We know the boss is laying in wait for us because we can actually hear her horse with the D-mic way in advance. We discussed last time the central theme of scene, or the historical relativity of context. In a sense, we experience this directly by an unexpected avenue, the central game mechanic, the camo system. The same colors or patterns that made you blend in a second ago, 1 second from now, may expose you, make you stand out. This is precisely the sort of shifting social and moral context the characters themselves must navigate in the actual story. In fact, a major color dichotomy that will be used is that of the chessboard, or even dominoes, as in domino theory, white and black. We can see just how far Snake has to come in his conversation about her with Zero.
Snake, I know how you're feeling. It's hard for me to believe, too, that a legendary hero like the boss would go to the Russians. She'd double-cross us like this. That's how it is, and if you don't accept it, you'll never be able to beat her.
That's not the problem. In terms of sheer technique, I'll never be able to beat her. I know that all too well.
You've got to do it, Snake. She's your enemy and your objective.
Enemy? We were together for 10 years, and now you tell me she's my enemy?
Enough. Hurry to the factory where Adam is waiting.
It seems likely to me that the 45 handgun Snake's given at the start of this mission is specifically for the boss to field strip and dismantle here.
You've been equipped with a 45 for this mission. Be careful, it's noisy.
I thought standard Fox procedure was procure on-site weapons acquisition.
The circumstances are different this time.
Suddenly, you're without any method of defending yourself, and you have to avoid the enemy entirely. This seems like a warm-up for the great escape you'll have to make out of Rosnigrad. Once Snake reaches the abandoned industrial zone, we encounter for the first time in person. The spy will know by the cryptonym Eva. Eva says that Adam, the contact you were told to expect, is a no-show if she doesn't know the right response to the code phrase, "Who are the Patriots?" The entire story Zero feeds you about the undercover KGB officers is most likely untrue. But if it is a fake story, it's also been fed to Eva, who uses it to pose undercover as a KGB spy. Eva and Snake will play a delicate game of spy versus spy that in the grand scheme of things seems designed to leave Snake disillusioned, and that will be crucial to his transformation over the game. Not that Eva will realize it. In fact, for a lot of the game, she thinks that she's going to have to kill you by the end. But somewhere along the way, she gets attached, not only to Snake, but more importantly, to the boss. The boss effectively flips Eva over to Zero's side. Even though Eva will still end up trying to fulfill her secret mission for China, she'll become loyal by the end to the boss, and go on to be one of the founding members of the Patriots. Like virtually every character in the game, Eva will be forever changed by joy and her devotion, her sacrifice. There's a religious quality to the events of the game, and Joy is more or less its messiah figure, to be sure. Again and again, we're being tested, we're being taught how to psychologically adapt by being thrust into situations where we're told one thing only to unnervingly encounter the opposite. This may partially explain the codename Naked Snake. We're being stripped down to nothing only to be remade again in our maker's image.
Major, what about my code name?
You mean Naked Snake?
Yeah, what does it mean?
It's because snakes slither through the grass unnoticed to those around.
No, I mean the naked part.
It means without embellishment, void of a specified quality. In other words, basic. And the procedure used for this mission will represent the modus operandi of Fox's future mission. In other words,
The essence of Fox. Naked and pure.
exactly. And as the fact that you went in practically naked. No weapons, no equipment.
I see. Means more than I realized. Major, what's this temptation Eva was talking about?
In the Old Testament of the Bible, Eve was seduced by a snake into tasting the fruit of knowledge. By eating the forbidden fruit, Adam and Eve disobeyed God's command and were cast out from the Garden of Eden. Thus, it was the snake who led mankind into original sin.
Come to think of it, I did break a rib in the virtuous mission. Maybe that's where Eva came from.
But the one who tempted Adam into eating the forbidden fruit was Eve. You may be working together, but she's still a KGB operative. Don't let your guard down.
I don't intend to.
Eva tells us Adam was replaced because Volgin decided he couldn't be trusted, and implies that she's won him over with strategic sexuality, an infamous tactic used by the real KGB. Now, one reason Eva shows off her body is obviously fan service, but it would be wrong to stop there. Eva's body plays right into the religious theme, and specifically the important Bible tale of Adam and Eve. One of the first things Eva says is a nod to this story. Are you here to tempt me? In the story, the devil seduces Eve into defecting against God, so to speak, by tempting her to eat an apple from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In a way, this too is a story about intelligence. Once Eve then convinces Adam, the first man, to do the same, humanity, with the taste of that apple, becomes aware of its own sinful nudity and gets cast out of Eden in the origin story of original sin. Snake is clearly ashamed of the body, ashamed of his physical urges, his sin of lust. No, not in any religious sense. Snake just isn't used to being around such a woman. Yet Eva is sexually liberated, as a nod perhaps to the coming changing times during the 1960s in the West. Another hint that Snake is somewhat antiquated when it comes to sexual mores happens when Eva has to explain to him in an optional radio conversation that Volgin and Rykov are lovers.
Treated as the same rank,
Yeah,
even though he's the major.
right.
Why?
You don't know?
No.
Even after seeing that photo?
No.
Has anyone
only perv out on Eva secretly at first, because he's been raised to think according to a very limiting set of virtues. He's also been somewhat jaded by the boss's betrayal. He doesn't know who or what to believe. Yet his instincts attract him to Eva, tell him there's no doubting that she'd feel good to touch, to get to know physically. So Snake's being bombarded with Eva's body, and it's very much part of the story and themes. It gives him even more of an internal struggle for Zero to exploit. Not to mention Eva to exploit. It's important to try and forget for a while that we know Eva isn't actually KGB. That makes her purpose here at the start easier to understand. Here Snake is, a soldier whose entire professional life he's spent fighting the red menace of evil communism. And now suddenly Khrushchev's forces are your allies. This is happening at a time when East and West are complete mysteries to each other. We might compare how Snake feels about communists to how listeners to Orson Welles' War of the Worlds felt about aliens. It's as though Eva's just come off a spaceship from Planet X. Eva being so sexual almost is to say, see, Soviet women are human after all. This helps Snake come around to the idea no enemy is absolute. Yet the same is also true of friends. The same beautiful and capable spy who steals your heart might only be doing so to stab you in the back. This atmosphere can change on a dime, and that's what Snake is meant to learn how to acclimate to. So how did Eva get Snake such a perfectly modified handgun? Well, she implies that she slept with someone to get it, but I think that she just wants Snake to stop asking questions about it.
How? A vault full of secret Western technology should be under strict surveillance.
You really want to know?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Well, I'm not telling anyway.
Why not?
It'd be a waste of time.
A waste of time.
Even if I explained how I did it, you'd never be able to do it yourself.
What does that mean?
Exactly what it sounds like.
Zero says that the route Eva provides makes good use of weak spots in the enemy's defenses, which is why it winds through stuff like swamps and caves. Vicious rock attacks have kept the swamp clear of enemies. Idaho, which makes her ideal to play the part of a former NSA defector. One reason she and Joy are able to become close, perhaps, is they both came out of the charm schools created by the philosophers during and prior to the war, where indoctrinated children were taken from all over the world. Joy, for a time, was even an instructor in one. This, of course, foreshadows how the philosophers' heirs, Cypher, and then later the Patriots, will themselves make use of child soldiers taken from battlefields all over the world. One easily missed detail in Snake Eater is found by unlocking Eva's second photograph. Portraying her at a much younger age, the schoolgirl uniform she's wearing strongly resembles the one that Paz will be wearing in Peace Walker. It's likely then that this picture was taken at one of the philosopher's charm schools, where we'll learn at the end of the game that Eva was raised. The Chinese get involved because a few years before, the Soviets stopped supplying them with research materials to finish their own nuclear bomb. Now, someone at a very high level within the KGB must have leaked a trove of intel to China for Eva to know what she knows. Eva changes the subject away from her Shanxi pistol's nation of origin to its rarity and expense, to dodge Snake sniffing out her true identity. The tranquilizer pistol that she provides is actually the same one the boss disarmed Snake of at the end of Virtuous Mission. Eva also provides you with the scientist disguise you'll use to infiltrate the Grand Design Bureau and directions on how to get there. But Snake first has to get some rest. It's then we see Eva contacting her real bosses in China over a two-way radio. The next morning, you're ambushed by the Ocelot unit. This will happen again outside the cave that Snake has to enter on his way to Grannon's lab.
Looks like the boss's info was right.
Even though he's covertly supporting you as a triple agent, Ocelot wants to know if he can impress you in battle. He's also playing the long game with Eva, whose cover story as a KGB insider he'll help solidify by seeming to out her as exactly that. But that's not until much later. The bullet that Ocelot wears around his neck is a Makarov round that he refitted to match a revolver.
discovered my true identity. They have no idea that I've been triple-crossing them. Yes, it appears that no one knew that I was Adam.
If Ocelot was the real Adam, then Adam and Eva were never code names for the NSA defectors, by the way, whose real names were William Martin and Vernon Mitchell. Nor would it really make sense to begin with for former members of the NSA, a civilian agency, to be assigned to a military outfit like Colgan's within the group. The reason Ocelot can't be one of those defectors, even in the alternative history timeline of MGS, is because, according to Eva, Ocelot was raised by the Gru and Volgan from a young age.
There were a lot of MIAs back then, during the last days of the war. Ocelot probably would have ended up the same way. But he was taken in and raised by Gru and Volgan.
Because he was special.
That's my guess.
So there's no way that he is also the same person who defected to the Soviet Union 4 years ago. The other subtle giveaway that the Adam and Eva story was a ruse is who Ocelot bragged about it to at the end. It isn't the first chief director of the KGB who he talks to first. No, it's the director of the CIA. Adam and Eva were supposed to be hated defectors working undercover for the KGB, remember? Yet Ocelot's talking about it with the American spy chief, which only makes sense if the story was planted by the CIA, in this case as disinformation. There were two defectors from the NSA in 1960, but this idea that they went undercover in Volgan's unit as Adam and Eva, I believe, is false. And the only reason that the CIA would have for planting this false information, arguably, is to clear a path for Eva. Ocelot may not have actually known this Eva was also Tanya from the very start. A subtle detail with Ocelot is that after Snake criticizes his engraved revolver, Ocelot gets rid of it. It isn't so much that Ocelot wants to kill Snake as best him in combat. Ocelot gets your location from the boss and plans his ambush in a stage that seems to embody the times themselves. It's a battlefield split into two, east and west. Ocelot is another supposedly Soviet soldier Snake finds himself feeling affection for. Like Snake and the boss, Snake and Ocelot begin to develop a strange bond that's essentially non-verbal. Snake doesn't really know why he keeps sparing Ocelot's life, just that he feels compelled to, from a certain affection.
These hornets won't go away.
The Hornets?
Yeah, they've been flying around over my head in a figure eight pattern and won't go away. Any idea why?
Well, Hornets use the figure eight dance to signal that they have food.
Food?
Yeah, like flowers and nectar.
What does it mean?
I don't know, but at least they're not attacking you, right?
During the fight with Ocelot, the Pain's hornets show up and signal to the swarm that they've found you by flying over your head in a figure eight. This causes the stage to slowly fill with hornets the closer you get to the end of the fight. We mentioned the theme of changes over time. One gameplay example of this is how Snake's eyesight adjusts to the cave the longer that you spend inside it. The cave was actually formed when Selenoyarsk was still an active volcano. After beating the Pain and moving through the mangrove swamp, you come across Volgan and his retinue moving Sokolov from where you're expecting to rescue him, Brandon's lab. This scene is the first time Snake sees Tanya. It seems that Eva, aka Tanya, has formed some connection with Sokolov, who will eventually provide her with a copy of the Shagohod's test data, thinking that she's KGB. Even here, it's clear they've established some sort of working relationship, tricking us into buying the cover story that Tanya is Sokolov's lover. Night has fallen. Snake's almost been in the field for 24 hours. It's now August 31st. What's easy to miss here is the subtle exchange between Joy and her son, Ocelot. It seems as though the same risky behavior that Ocelot just exhibited by playing Russian roulette with Sokolov also describes his risky confrontations with Snake. Joy takes his gun like a kid's toy and only gives it back with the silent understanding Ocelot can't keep trying to have his little rematches with Snake because it risks interfering with the mission. Little unspoken moments like these are why I've suspected all along that Ocelot knows the boss is his mother. They just seem to have a mother-son bond. But I should point out that this isn't the only valid interpretation. At the very least, Ocelot has been raised since birth to work as a spy for the American philosophers. Whether he knows the truth for sure is impossible to prove, and it may in the end be immaterial. The point is that Ocelot and the boss are both undercover American operatives, whether or not he knows their true connection. Ocelot slinks off. Meanwhile, the boss tells Volgin that the pain is dead, which infuriates him. Volgin is starting to become aware that Snake must be getting outside help, and he suspects, as he's meant to, the forces of Khrushchev. The KGB will continue to provide everyone with the necessary scapegoat to conceal it's actually the Chinese and American philosophers Volgin has to worry about. The boss tells Volgin the Cobras will surely deal with Snake before the final Shagohod tests. It's to prepare for this test that Sokolov is now being moved to Groznygrad, the fortress in the mountains. But we won't find that out for a little while. Zero actually misleads you by concluding Sokolov was caught trying to escape from Brannan's lab. Ironically, moving from the lab is the last thing that Sokolov wants to do.
Major, Sokolov's been hauled off.
Yes, they probably caught him trying to escape from the lab. Didn't Volgin say that they still needed to perform the final test?
Yeah.
Then Sokolov must have been taken back to the lab. Get to the lab and get Sokolov the hell out of there.
In both of the scenes so far with the Cobras that are worth going into now. In the Phantom Pain, we learn that the parasites powering super soldiers like the Cobras are also sometimes capable of changing the weather. If we look closely, the boss appears to cause the mist that obscures her from view on the bridge at the end of Virtuous Mission. And it seems that the Phantom 6th Cobra, the Sorrow, can trigger rainfall. The Sorrow has done this in both scenes with the Cobras so far. Snake thinks that they're taking Sokolov back to Grannon's lab, which is why we continue on to that lab, even though Sokolov is being taken in the opposite direction, towards Groznygrad. So why does Volgin superstitiously say Kuwabara every time there's a rainstorm? Well, this is a reference to Japanese culture, specifically to the legendary scholar, poet, and political actor who supposedly became a yokai, or spirit creature, named Ujawara no Michizane. The quote from yokai.com, Michizane fell from grace and lived a thankless life of hard work. Following his death, a series of natural disasters, from plague to drought, befell the city that he had loved and been exiled from, Kyoto. His rival died, and the entire family of the emperor who had banished and demoted him did too. When a huge lightning bolt struck, a number of officials who were involved in his exile were killed in a subsequent fire. Supposedly, this led everyone in Kyoto to believe that Michizane had become a vengeful thunder god. Though many of Japan's provinces were plagued by lightning storms at this time, only one never seemed to suffer from them, the Kuwabara region. Since this story became a legend, superstitious Japanese people have said Kuwabara to ward off lightning. After the warehouse, we come across the first area in Grannon's territory, Granny Gorky South. Environmental storytelling conveys that some of the scientists forced to work for Volgin in Grannon's facility have tried to escape, necessitating the booby traps that fill this area. This is a nod to the real-world Shirashkas, or OKBs, of the Soviet Union, where the relationship between researchers and the state often changed in an instant from bodyguard to executioner. With a single word, the same soldier that had served as your guard might be ordered to shoot you dead. Such was the atmosphere of suspicion, double crosses, and devotion to ideological orthodoxy that epitomized the Cold War. Actually, the traps in the forest, it turns out, are themselves also part of advanced research and development. Soon enough, the Cold War will be playing out via proxy wars in underdeveloped post-colonial regions like Indochina and Central Africa. These traps have been designed for just such regions, where the Soviets will trick impoverished militants into fighting their imperialistic wars for them. More environmental storytelling occurs inside Grannon's lab. We know it's been converted from a prison because holding cells still remain on the lower levels there. This all serves as a metaphor for one of the central themes of the game, exploitation. Whether it's rocket scientists or career soldiers, Snake Eater is full of talented, brilliant specialists getting used and then thrown away. The only option for them is often just to adapt, like the boss has. This we see indirectly hinted at here by the region's rabbits. who've been exposed to the fear's venom so many times in field testing that they've become immune. I could spend an entire video just tracing the supply lines that serve as the arteries for Selenium infrastructure, all of which we encounter purely through environments, but that's for another time. Taking away his sorrows, Volgan has decided to redirect funding to Sokolov's Shagohod instead of to Granon's Metal Gear project. So Granon decides in return to betray Volgan and help you defeat him. Granon achieved prestige not only for his participation in the Second World War, but for creating one of the original so-called Scud missiles, the SS-1C. These are short-range ballistic missiles that will achieve notoriety in small-scale regional conflicts throughout the late 20th century. Technically, Granon developed the Scud's mobile platform, not the SS-1C missile itself. According to the Missile Defense Project by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the SS-1C, or Scud-B, is still one of the most common and widely deployed missile systems in the world. So many of them, and so many varieties, have been proliferated that the international community can't even keep track. Brandon says a lot of important stuff in this scene. He explains the origins of the Metal Gear concept as the missing link between infantry and artillery. He mentions that he plans to send all the details of the aborted project to a friend in the US, who Brandon implies is also a weapons developer. This man we'll later know as Huey Emmerich, the father of Hal, aka Otacon Emmerich. Brandon hopes Emmerich will make Metal Gear a reality to get back at Volgan's faction for rejecting it. At the end of the game, Ocelot will obtain Brandon's design documents and pass them on to the CIA, when Brandon won't live long enough to carry out his threats. The scientist also drunkenly divulges some of the secrets behind the Shagohod's development system, that it uses a rocket engine, for example. But the biggest secret Brandon unveils is the existence of something called the Philosopher's Legacy. Using this, Volgan has funded the development of the form that warfare will take in the future. He's got the power to write tomorrow's history well in advance with the legacy, and he's left Granon out. But of course, we playing this already know it will be Granon, not Sokolov, whose weapon platforms will truly survive these events. The revelation of its existence begins to expose us to the truth about what really goes on behind the scenes in the Metal Gear Solid universe. Events are shaped by people totally outside the rules, outside the public's awareness, people like Zero. The Philosophers were a criminal private organization who ran the world through crime and power mongering. Their greed and sneakiness has torn them apart, yet still, no one can really oppose them without sinking to their level, without becoming one of them too. All of Volgan's army's cutting-edge weapons and gear, like the flying platforms and the Hind gunships, have been bought with the Philosopher's Legacy. A lot of the gear you find in Selino-Yarsk is American. These weapons the Soviets captured on the battlefields of Vietnam, which is rapidly turning from a proxy war to a full-blown American conflict. They've been sent back here for study. We find out that Volgan's forces use the M37 shotgun for jungle warfare based on the tactics and the weaponry that the SAS had used in the Malayan emergency. There's something similar with the presence of the experimental stun grenade in Selino-Yarsk, which Sigint tells us is based on an SAS prototype as well. The Soviet flying platforms were created off stolen research from an aborted American project that couldn't make it past field testing in the 1950s. Actually, the game jokingly implies that Snake originated the term Hind.
They must be doing field tests on the initial prototype.
A next generation chopper that's a little smaller than the hip. Maybe we should call it a Hind.
Not bad. It's cool with me.
Then it's settled. We'll refer to that new type helicopter as a Hind from now on.
Of non-virtuousness, he's conniving, prideful, amoral, greedy, envious, lustful, and even a drunk. Yet he understands the world much better than Snake does. This meeting is really a first confrontation with the utter amorality of our mission and this world it's playing out in. Granon, imprisoned in his own honorary museum and research bureau, thinks he can outmaneuver the powers that be. Soon enough, he winds up as just another dead scientist, another expired pawn in their never-ending game. Notice how Granon's reasoning for betraying Volgan will come back to sting us in the end.
Why are you helping me?
Unlike Sokolov, the thought of defecting,
has never once crossed my mind.
I love my country. I wish to remain a hero of the great motherland.
Brandon wants to remain a hero in the eyes of his countrymen, not unlike Snake, who's embarked on this dirty assassination mission beneath the honor of a soldier to redeem his name and that of his unit. By the end, we'll learn the title Big Boss actually drips with venomous irony. We are only above the boss in terms of our disloyalty. The name is a kind of punishment, preserving Snake's guilt and sense of loss. By killing her, Snake will feel as though in the end it is he who betrays her, not the other way around. Brandon jokes that one of the reasons he'll help Snake is for complimenting his shoes. These shoes were a gift from Tanya, aka Eva. And when Volgan finds the tracking device she's concealed inside them, he'll torture Brandon to death, trying to get him to talk. Now next, Snake gets ambushed again, this time by the Fear. It seems as though each of the Cobras are not only testing your abilities and preparing you for the fight against the boss, they're giving you first-hand experience with the emotions that they bring into battle.
I would guide you to a world of anguish beyond your imagination. The boss is relentless. I will give you fear such as you've never experienced before.
This is exactly the reason, after all, that the boss gave for why Snake was not yet ready to become one of them, saying that he lacks an emotion to carry into combat. Instead, he's still looking for a reason to fight, something that will only work against him as a soldier.
According to Eva, you should start by going to the crevice to the north and...
Can we trust her?
What's that?
Eva is with the KGB, isn't she? Can I really believe what she says?
Brandon remarks by the end of your conversation that it's already dawn of August 1st. It'll roughly be midday by the point that you defeat the Fear. And by this time, over in Rosnigrad, the Phase 2 tests of the Shagohod are already complete. This puts a bit of a timed desperation on Snake's shoulders, given that once the last preparations are over,
The Colonel won't have any qualms about killing him if he thinks the CIA is closing in.
he also finds out that there's a locked door barring the way to the tunnel connecting to the fortress underground. Eva tells you to meet her in ruins atop the mountains, but to get there you'll have to defeat the third Cobra at the end. He awaits you in something of a haunted forest at the base of the mountains, Sakravino. This forest is outside the jurisdiction of any Guru patrols, leaving it completely isolated, the perfect spot for a sniper showdown. Of course, you can kill the End early in the game by sniping him outside the docks, in which case it will be Ocelot's commandos, who you'll have to evade here instead. The End can also actually die from old age if the fight goes on long enough. And Snake can also lose the fight, get captured, and have a nightmare. That plays out in a totally different gameplay sequence, more similar to something like Devil May Cry than your traditional Metal Gear Solid. This is a good time to bring up what in the Phantom Pain is revealed to be the secret source of the Cobra unit's powers, ability-enhancing parasites. The only ones we're told about explicitly in that game belong to the Pain and the End, but it's implied all the Cobras rely on these microbial agents for their unbelievable abilities. All of the Cobras are fitted with explosives linked to their vital signs. Upon death, the charges detonate to prevent these parasite soldiers from falling into enemy hands. The End's cell tissue has been assimilated with parasites that keep him alive long after the end of his natural life using photosynthesis. These same parasites will wind up in the old Dene code talker by the events of the Phantom Pain. It also seems the End has an almost supernatural sensitivity to the natural environment. He uses the forest itself to hunt you down, not to mention his only spotter, a parrot. If you listen closely to his speech, the End knows that Snake will be the one to finally end his life. He also subtly hints that the End's true purpose is to send Snake on his way to become Big Boss.
Let me linger in this world just a little longer. I have already slept enough for one lifetime. Enough for an eternity. You have my thanks. I have to thank you for waking me. If
Climbing an enormous ladder, Snake meets Eva in the mountaintop ruins. She tells us that as the Shagohod's approaching completion, words come in that Khrushchev's forces are on their way. Is this really true, or is it a false alarm to distract Volgan's forces and create an opening for Snake's infiltration? It's never really made clear. The only time Khrushchev's forces actually show up, it's almost to bomb you and the boss to hell at the very end. When you meet up with Eva, Snake spots a scar on her abdomen that may hint towards a former pregnancy. The philosophers have a thing about abducting children, so it may be that Eva's kid, if they exist at all, was taken from her upon birth. But that's pure speculation. At any rate, one day she'll serve as the surrogate mother for Snake's clones, and this may be in fact a nod to that. Whatever the truth about this scar, we're never told directly. Paramedic even hints at one point they're already thinking of cloning Snake once the technology is ready.
My genes are going to be a valuable commodity.
Exactly.
They'd never let that happen.
Just think, even if your body dies, you survive and go on to bigger and better accomplishments. If you think about it, it's kind of an honor.
To get to Sokolov, Snake will have to steal the identity of a certain Volgan associate, Major Ivan Rykov. Good thing a face mask and his exact visage was created by your unit's whiz-kid, SIGINT, way in advance. This was for an operation that got aborted before it got underway. It's next we see from our vantage point overlooking the fortress that Grandin has been killed. Volgan knows there's a spy, and Ocelot's virtuous facade serves as the perfect cover for the fact that there's not only one, but actually 3 spies in Volgan's midst: Ocelot, Eva, and the boss. Volgan mentions the high-tech plastic explosive C3 has been stolen from the fortress. It's been stolen by Eva, who won't give us any until the time is right. The boss then shows up and announces that both the Fear and the End are dead. He also tells Volgan that you aren't just after Sokolov, you're also, according to her, after the philosopher's legacy. Not even Snake has realized yet that recovering the legacy is one of his real objectives in this mission. Ironically, the boss pretends that she's so distressed by your successes, he's decided to run and get to Davy Crockett. At the very end of the game, we'll hear Ocelot say that she'll use it to nuke Groznygrad. The boss makes sure the Groznygrad forces know you're coming to step up the difficulty of your test for the next level. The boss is looking in your direction in this scene as well. She knows that you're here just like back at the warehouse. What we won't find out until Snake is in Volgan's torture room is that during the CQC session at the very start of Operation Snake Eater, the boss planted a transmitter on Snake's body. After defeating the last Cobra, the Fury, and masquerading as Rykov, Snake finally tracks down Sokolov inside Groznygrad. It's here, just beforehand, we see him give Eva the Shagohod's test data. Sokolov explains that the Shagohod fires a medium-range ballistic missile in a way that gives it the range of an intercontinental ballistic missile. By initializing the first rocket launch stage itself at a speed of over 300 miles per hour. This extends the platform's range to 6,000 miles, putting the U.S. right in the line of fire without the need for any MRBM platforms in Cuba. Using the Philosopher's Legacy, Volgan intends to mass-produce the Shagohod and export it to not only Eastern Bloc countries, but to armies and insurgents without nations around the world. The careful balance of mutually assured destruction between East and West would then collapse, as one small group could use a Shagohod to nuke its local or regional rival without any involvement of the West or the East. The end of mutually assured destruction would in turn make localized nuclear strikes routine. They would no longer need involve either superpower. And just like that, the delicate balance of nuclear terror would disintegrate, the superpower's nuclear deterrence would become powerless, and the future would bring war without end all over the world. Though no nuclear weapons have been used since World War II to date, the irony of Volgan's plan is it does very much resemble the status quo in the current post-Cold War 21st century. If India or Pakistan, both of the nuclear powers, for example, were to bomb the other, it would not, unlike during the days of the Cold War, trigger a chain reaction of mutually assured destruction. But for that very reason, the risks of a localized nuclear attack like this have never been greater. All that can be stopped here if you destroy Volgan's prototype now. But surprisingly, Sokolov no longer has any interest in defecting to the West. Though he does miss his family and he stayed faithful to them, he's realized the Americans, too, will just use him as another pawn. Volgan's plan to challenge the status quo is the only aspect of his insurrection with any real potential to do damage. Gradually throughout the MGS saga, this plan will evolve from a threat to an integral aspect of how Cypher will maintain world balance. But instead of using something like the Shagohod, it'll be private military forces that will become their weapon of mass production. Using them, Zero and Cypher will transition the world to a digital future, one without borders, where war will change and lose its substance entirely. But all that will only happen once Big Boss and Zero have a falling out and become enemies, opposing factions who both believe that only they truly understand the boss's will. The way the Shagohod can function as an ICBM platform without the need for actual ICBMs makes it somewhat detection-proof insofar as its missiles only become functional ICBMs when fired. For the rest of the time, they're IRBMs. This will go on to perhaps inspire Skullface's method of proliferation that evades detection using metallic archaea, and later the stealth nuclear payload used by Metal Gear Rex. Though EVA and MGS4 will tell us a tale of Zero and Big Boss as two former friends who have a falling out over the boss's will, the situation is slightly more complex. Remember when I said not everything will go according to Zero's plan? What I meant was how Snake will be changed by the events of the game. He's supposed to become just another version of the boss, a selfless idle soldier who will carry out any mission faithfully. Instead, he succumbs to PTSD-stricken repression, denial, and eventually rebellion and rejection against not only Zero, who makes Snake angry by cloning him in 1971, but against the boss, who Snake will come to see as having rejected him by laying down her gun and allowing Snake to kill her. But most of that will have to wait until we cover Peace Walker. Rykov has de facto colonel level clearance because he's one of Volgan's playthings. Volgan, well cast as the immoral monotheistic villain in this Gato play, is a literal so-called sodomite, which ties in perfectly to the quasi-religious dimensions to this mission. In the very next scene, practically, Sokolov is double kneecapped by Volgan. Snake does manage to CQC him, but not before the boss appears to expose his identity and flip him on his butt. When the boss lectures you about disguises, as Kojima points out in the game commentary himself, it's really herself that she's talking to. Snake then gets knocked out by Volgan, wrathful for him hurting Volgan's lover, Rykov, and it's the last time that Snake will have full use of both eyes. But that will have to wait should this video attract enough of a positive reaction until part 3. Please consider also becoming a backer of the channel on Patreon. Until next time, boss. Welcome back to part 3 of What Even Happens in Metal Gear Solid 3. For this episode, after completing my typical synopsis and analysis, I'll be mixing things up somewhat to provide, once and for all, my theory of what's going on behind the scenes. So let's begin. Barely surviving a naked escape from the very base you've worked so hard to sneak into, Groznygrad, Snake, briefly glimpsing the River of the Dead in a surreal and phantasmic interlude, regroups with Eva's help before returning to Groznygrad for one last showdown with Volgan and the Shagohod. Using instructions provided to him by Sokolov shortly before the scientist was killed, together with Eva, Snake destroys the Shagohod and stops Volgan, before finally facing his former mentor and finishing his mission. But then comes a double betrayal. Eva, actually an agent of the Chinese government, attempts to steal the secret document you were, along the mission, assigned to get. and leaves you with a cold and lonely debriefing on what the boss was really up to. And it wasn't defecting. Now awarded the title Big Boss, Snake, deeply traumatized and disillusioned, can do nothing but pay his respects at the boss's unmarked grave, left anonymous due to the disrepute her cover story has caused. Well, with the synopsis out of the way, let's get into what really happened in MGS3. Snake's been strung up for interrogation, a black plastic bag draped over his head. One very subtle detail in this scene is that at the start of it, we are actually hearing Volgin torturing Sokolov, and torturing him, it sounds, to death. This would be retconned in the non-Kojima Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops, but that's who Volgin's actually in the middle of interrogating when we wake up. Demonstrating his extreme sadism, Volgin continues to beat on Sokolov's corpse before letting it crumple to the ground. You can even hear it get audibly dragged out of the room.
Guess he's dead.
Once he starts torturing Snake, Volgin inadvertently causes a transmitter to fall off of your body, which the boss immediately takes credit for. This is how she's known your location all along. Evidently, she planted it on you during CQC at the start of the mission. When Volgin asks the boss about it, she says unconvincingly that she planted it on you so that the Cobras could ambush you. He points out that if that were so, why did the Cobras still all wind up dead? Volgin's words here about the Cobras reinforce the idea that they've been meant to let Snake kill them. Just as he's suspecting here, they knew where he was, yet every single time their ambushes failed, as they were meant to.
It's part of their legend.
Legend.
The legend of the Cobra unit. I'll let Siggy explain. Siggy?
Yeah, that's a microbomb.
Microbomb.
Yep. During World War II, the Cobra unit was used for the nastiest kinds of wet works, the kind that could never be let out into the open. Their missions were so top secret that not only were they forbidden to be taken prisoner, they couldn't even leave their corpse behind. Because of this, or so the legend goes, they carried a microbomb with them on their missions in case they needed to commit suicide. I always thought it was just a rumor. I never expected it would turn out to be true. But why would they be carrying bombs this time around? It's not like they're in hostile territory.
Maybe they're ready to die.
Ready to die?
Yeah. They've got no unit to go back to. Not even a country.
So they've got no place to die except the battlefield, huh?
As I said last time, each Cobra's speech is more about giving Snake a taste of their own specific emotion that they bring into battle than about how they're going to kill him. It's almost like one big training op, or more like a final exam before Snake's graduation. Volgin then asks for that magic word in MGS3, proof. He wants proof the boss wasn't secretly helping Snake along, sacrificing her own men just to weaken Volgin, spying for the enemy. Notice that Volgin throws the transmitter away, but behind him, Ocelot catches it. Volgin tells the boss to take Snake's eyes to prove that she wants revenge for him having killed the Cobras.
Ruin him, just as he did the Cobras.
But what's kind of funny about the relationship between these two characters is Volgin's clearly intimidated by the boss, as we saw not only here but in the last scene when the boss used CQC to stop Volgin from shooting Snake. To call this a low point for Snake's mission is an understatement. But notice that ultimately, rescuing Sokolov didn't matter in the end. In this regard, maybe it was somewhat of a sham objective to pull the wool over Snake's eyes about his real primary purpose, which is to recover the legacy.
Your real target is the Philosopher's Legacy, isn't it?
All Sokolov was good for was providing Eva with the Shagohod's launch data and telling you the best way to destroy it, which is blowing up its reserves of jet fuel using C3. Presumably, Eva learned this as well, and before you did. She stole the C3, apparently on the way to meeting you in the mountains and stashing your stolen getaway vehicle, the Wig. But more on that later. This brings up a key question, though. We know why the boss was tracking Snake, but why was Eva apparently tracking Gran?
Look at this. Transmitter. Exactly.
You say Brandon's shoes were rigged with a transmitter? That sounds like something the KGB's been working on lately. It's exactly like you described. A miniature transmitter that's small enough to put in a shoe.
Brandon said he got the shoes from a woman called Tatiana. You think she's a KGB spy?
Could be. Or maybe it's some kind of ploy to throw suspicion on her. Anyway, it's your job to find out.
Well, it's implied that Eva already established Granin as an asset before you meet him at his lab. Presumably the transmitter was so Eva could know the best times and locations to visit him. But apart from this practical use, the transmitter also helps cover her true identity, because it's KGB technology. This gives the Chinese plausible deniability, hides Eva's true objective of obtaining the philosopher's legacy by making it seem the spy is working for Khrushchev, and sends Volgan on a mole hunt for a KGB spy that, as far as Eva knows, doesn't really exist. But more on this at the end. The bullet that the boss shoots into your leg conceals the fake death pill that you can use to make escaping a little easier. Meanwhile, Ocelot implants a tracker in your back, which Eva will somehow know about and remove for you in a secret and hilarious bonus scene if you don't remove it first.
But how did you know there was a transmitter lodged there? That's some female intuition you've got.
And if you don't remove the transmitter, the Ocelot unit will be waiting for you in front of the waterfall. This will result in a short change to the following cutscene, where you'll hear and kind of see Eva mowing all the remaining Ocelots down. The boss and Eva also share a glance here, which will be very important for what's to come. Though Eva won't know until later on, Joy has already figured out she's really working undercover, not as KGB, but as a Chinese spy. Eva will think that Joy figures this out because both spent time in the Philosopher's Charm schools, but it may have something to do with the fact that Eva is operating off largely false information planted by the bosses and Ocelot's bosses at the CIA, who are synonymous in Snake Eater with the American philosophers. At any rate, notice that just because the boss is working separately with Ocelot and with Eva does not mean that Ocelot and Eva are in this together. Ocelot suspects Tatiana as the spy that he encountered before, and yet again does his juggling routine to decide a so-called traitor's fate. Remember that he called Sokolov a traitor before doing this little routine the first time. This time, Snake's the one who sees the right gun ahead of time and throws himself in the way to save Eva, losing sight in his right eye as the price. Distracted by his own sudden sadistic arousal, Volgan slinks away, telling Tanya to meet him in his room. And Ocelot reveals this is the moment where he truly becomes the sadist that we'll know and love in later games.
Watching this has made me realize something. It's really not that bad. It's the ultimate form of expression.
Notice the boss seems to give Ocelot the signal of his own signature hand gesture before he disappears. A gesture of secret intimacy, this is similar to the glance that she can't bring herself to give him outside Sokolov's room as Snake behind her is being beaten senseless.
Where?
It's only now that Snake puts together Eva and Tanya are the same person, by the way. Eva tells you an escape route, but along the way the alarm is raised and the sewers get cut off. It seems at that moment that Snake's fate is sealed. So how did we end up in this predicament?
Huh.
If everything, as I say, was going according to plan, then what happened?
I'm missing one of my pens. I was just using it.
Nobody anticipated.
I come here looking for Tatiana. What should I find?
It seems that as soon as she figured out Volgin was missing, that the boss headed straight to you using the tracking device. It was then she prevented Volgin from killing you, but she could not prevent him from torturing you. The medley of emotions that are portrayed on the boss's face as she's asked to remove your eye hints that this is not something she was planning on having to do. When Ocelot confronts you in the sewer, it seems he's actually here to give you your only shot at survival while maintaining his own cover. The sight of his loaded gun makes Snake leap into the river, but we find out at the end of the game that the bullet he's put in it is actually just a blank. This is all just to cement, perhaps, the story that Snake did all of this on his own. In other words, Ocelot is helping to secure Snake's legend, while hiding that he's a triple agent working both the GRU and the KGB for the CIA. If we're talking about MGS3's links to the other games in the series, the one location we have to mention is the Fortress Grozny Grad. There are references to every other Metal Gear up to 3 combined here. When you first arrive, there's no question Grozny Grad is meant to resemble Shadow Moses. Not only do we have these boxes like the docks, these searchlights in wide open spaces like the heliport, and the freezing cold snowy weather, how Sokolov is kept inside the west wing of the weapons lab is very similar to how Otacon has to be rescued from the nuclear storage building in MGS1. But there are also nods to the MSX era games as well. Grozny Grad's construction and layout strongly resembles Outer Heaven from the original Metal Gear, yet its location, roughly near Central Asia, is closer to the Fortress City setting of 1990's Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, Zanzibar. For years, in fact, fans have speculated whether or not Grozny Grad actually is Zanzibar.
All right. And that is going to be the end of this video. Anyone and everyone still watching, I want to thank you very much. You know, hopefully you find this stuff interesting, entertaining, informative, or anything like that. I hope you enjoyed the Metal Gear stuff I had playing in the background. Really didn't have much to talk about, so. And I love listening to Future Sound Production stuff. His, I don't know, his channel's one of the best. It's insane. And other than that, man, just thanks again for watching. The Andrew Glowczewski Experience, episode 224, working on character concepts, pushing this guy as much as I can, and to really get the ideas into my head, who this guy is, so that way when I work on the story, you know, it's solidified in there. Just doing it all through repetition. And yeah, I still have a few more to do with them, but yeah, everything here is just fun that I'm having. And yeah, man, I'll see you around. I'm G Mr. Drew on all social media. You can follow, like, and subscribe. Links are in my bio along with my website, gmrdrew.art. You can go check that out. You can see everything and anything that I've ever worked on. You know, I've been doing art for over 20 years, probably over 25 years at this point. And you can pretty much see work that I've done all the way back to 1999, which is pretty insane. Either way, yeah, man, that's, like I said, it's going to be the end of this. I love you all. Peace.